Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you to our fourth module in the coach track, where we are continuing to equip you on how you can be a better coach and improve your area of ministry and help the leaders underneath you to be the best they can be. So we're going to talk about the 5 competencies that are really important to be an effective coach. As a review, the first one is mentorship. This is the number one. This is the prime competency to being a coach, and that is the ability to help grow people through the right experiences. This is the number one thing that you kind of see where people are and how you can help them grow spiritually, practically, in their skill sets to accomplish what they're doing, what their area of ministry involves, but also spiritually, personally, how to do that. Inspire, have a heart to encourage, unite, motivate. Delegate, that is the ability to know what you can do and the ability to know what other people can do. So it's not just you doing everything. That's not effective leadership. You have to help empower other people to do that. And then what we're going to be talking about today is equipping. We'll get to that in a second. And then next time, in our next module, our last one, we're going to be talking about reproduce, multiplying yourself and others. So when we talk about equipping, essentially, how we've set this apart is that equipping is being able to coach and equip. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they're different, but this is a vital thing to help grow your leaders and help them to improve. This is one of the most important aspects of coaching because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is how you help your team grow often. If you would turn with me to Ephesians 4:12 and 16, it says, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him, who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, which each part is working properly, make the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. So ultimately, the goal of this is to help people grow. God gives the church, gives ministries leaders, and part of their job is to equip, to help train and raise up other people. And there's different things, in life. You're helping people to, how do you have a healthy marriage? How do you live single? How do you honor God with your time? These are all things that we're, as leaders, helping people do. As a coach, what we've seen is this is a really important role that we have seen in the past, which, when it's missing, has a big impact on every area of ministry. We've seen where, it's easy to just get task focused. And we all know certain tasks have to get done. Seats have to be put out, flags have to be put up, curriculum has to be reviewed and printed. These things have to happen. But ultimately, our heart is that as people serve, we are developing in them and they're growing. Leadership development is discipleship. Leadership development is discipleship. When you help someone grow in their finances, or even in a practical skill, or even how to read the Bible, of course, all of these things help people grow and honor God in their areas of life. So your role is super important, and that's what we're talking about today, is equipping and coaching and how that plays out. I want to highlight, as a coach, the differences between equipping and coaching. Equipping is getting the right people the right information. So you're exposing them to the right information. Equipping is more teaching. You're getting them ready. You're giving them the ammo they need to accomplish. You're giving them the tools they need to do their job well. Coaching is getting the right people to do it the right way. Coaching is development. And it all falls under the umbrella of coaching because it's kind of like, in a football team or a baseball team, is you're getting the right information. You have to teach the rules. You have to teach, by the way, if you swing this way at this angle, you have more torque and you can hit further. Or if you're football, if you get in this stance, you'll have more leverage. You've got to get the right information. And then coaching is developing. You're observing and watching and like, all right, you're doing this well, but I see this technique. So both of these are super important. You have to equip and to coach. And so how do we do that? Before we go into the how, we have to know the why. If we don't know the why, then we don't have the motive behind it. The why. Without coaching, your team will never be what they can be. What that also means is without coaching, your area of ministry will never be what it could be. And what that means is, as a church, we will never be what we could be as a church if we don't have this element to it. I want to give you an example in sports on how important coaching is. So if you take someone like Tom Brady, who, even if you don't like Tom Brady, it's hard to argue that he's not, the best, or at least one of the best quarterbacks of all time. And I think it's really tough to make that argument. He's like multiple Super Bowls, more than anybody else. And if you just look at his statistics, he is maybe not just the best football player of all time, maybe the best in any position. You can make that argument even if you don't like him. But you have to also understand that Tom Brady had one of the best coaches of all time. And even if you don't like him, Bill Belichick, he is cited as one of the best of all time. He just has this mind. And there, especially early on, Tom Brady was a 6th-round draft pick, and so he got selected by Bill Belichick. And then Bill Belichick put him in the game, and he kept him over Drew Bledsoe. And Drew Bledsoe was one of the best quarterbacks in the league at that time. And so you never would have had Tom Brady had Bill Belichick had not kept Brady going. And there was a lot of training, especially in the early years. And so even after Tom Brady had proved he can win, apart from Bill Belichick, those early years, he probably wouldn't have got a lot of those fundamentals, a lot of those things, without amazing coaching. Well, then you take another quarterback by the name of Matthew Stafford. And Matthew Stafford, these two happen to be two of my favorite quarterbacks of all time. Matthew Stafford is one of the most talented quarterbacks to ever play the game. If you talk to scouts, they highlight that his arm is a generational arm. Like, he can throw things. He can go sideways. He can do no-look passes. He can do anything that you really need. But he has never had a great coach. He struggled with the Detroit Lions forever and never really. In fact, when it came to the national news, people don't even know who he is. And he's one of the most talented players in the NFL. But he's never had solid coaching. Then all of a sudden, he goes into the LA Rams, and you see an instant difference because there's solid coaching around him, and immediately there was an obvious difference where at this point in this recording, the Detroit Lions have not won a game without Matthew Stafford this season. Detroit Lions would win, but barely win, and people would say it's Matthew Stafford's fault. No. The only way that the Lions ever had a chance to win is because of his gifting, but he never got developed. So at Detroit, he never won a playoff game in Detroit. He never got that training, that coaching early on that was effective. Tom Brady did. That's a big difference. Many would probably argue that Matthew Stafford probably has more natural talent than Tom Brady. Most people, he has a better arm. There's some intangibles, maybe it'd be hard to identify, but what we know is Tom Brady got good coaching. What we also know is Matthew Stafford did not. What that means is there are people on your team, you don't actually know how good they are until they get really good coaching. You really don't know. You might be able to observe some things, of course, but when you get solid coaching, all of a sudden, someone who maybe you don't really see much there, all of a sudden it's like, wow, they're really blossoming. And maybe there are some people who are obviously already good, and then they get coaching and they're even better. Coaching matters. That's why we're taking this time to invest in you, because our hope is that you would actually invest in our leaders and help them grow and be better. So we're going to talk at first about equipping, and our main strategy for equipping are what we call huddles. And there's different forms of huddles, but the bottom line is you get together and you do some form of huddle. Like if you're on a dream team and most of your stuff happens on a Sunday morning, you do very quick huddles. So you get together, you pray for each other, and there's maybe like one little nugget. Maybe if you're greeting, it's like, don't forget, today, let's keep our smiles on and wave with intention. It's just a little moment of equipping. It's what we call a short huddle. But then there's long huddle models, which is something where we have light meetings, where our teams break up and they get they get more in-depth equipping. So these are kind of our leadership huddle type of situations. You might get together once a semester or once a year for a more extended equipping time. This is a specific type of huddle. And so that's kind of some of our strategies and how we do that. So if you went through the lead track, you probably have you have a huddle kind of guide, but we're going to give them to you again in the coach track, so that's reinforced. So again, this template is something you can use in a short huddle or a long huddle. So basically, there's there's 5 main sections. One is connect, like an icebreaker, how you guys doing, that sort of thing. Celebrate. You celebrate what God's doing in your team, the church, individuals. Hey, such and such, this is their first time serving, or this is the such and such person's 1-year anniversary, or this is their birthday, or whatever it might be. You celebrate, and then you communicate. So in a short huddle, you're gonna have you might have just a moment to highlight one skill or one aspect of the day. For example, if you're again on the Connect team and it's a Sunday morning, or maybe the Grow team, and it's time that we're getting people signed up for small groups. One of the equipment is, don't forget, today we're doing a big push for people to sign into small groups. Remember, when people get into a small group, they're more likely to grow spiritually, they're more likely to get connected, they're more likely to stick when things get tough. And so let's do everything we can. And so what we do is, if you get in a conversation, make sure we try to invite people to join a small group. And that might involve you sharing your testimony of what they've meant to you. And this is just a short moment of equipping. If you're a coach, do not waste your weekly huddles. Use those moments to help refine small areas in a short amount of time. If it's a longer huddle, then it's going to be 90 minutes, maybe even some of you, when you guys do a semester long, it could be as much as 2 hours long. So know what you're communicating. This is where you do a more holistic or a further equipping on some things that are really important. This could be, if you're in small groups, it could be on how to facilitate difficult situations. It could be, how do you better communicate to parents if you're in the kids area, whatever it might be. So long huddles and short huddles, we use them both, but they both use the basically same template. Just one of them is shorter than the other. It's really important when you do equipping. Our process for both equipping and coaching, because this process actually uses both, is what we call the learning loop. This is probably the most important tool that you'll use as a coach. So if you don't know this one, this is the one where we're going to ask you to make sure that you know how to use this. And so ask for help if you need help in getting developed in this, because this is your main tool in development. Where if you're using your huddles, you start to teach it. We're going to explain the learning loop again at the end here, but in your communication guide, you'd probably utilize part of this learning loop. You'd communicate the information, and then you'd go through the steps to make sure that it actually gets into the people. It's not just sharing the information. So mark that, put an asterisk next to it, and be like, okay, I got to make sure I look at the learning loop, because we're going to give you a reminder and a refresher of what that looks like. Convey. This is the time to communicate announcements, something along those lines, and we actually did a short video. We're developing, outside of these modules, we're developing short videos to help ongoing equipping. So we actually even did a video on how do you do an effective announcement. And so as we do these things, ask, and we're going to give you links to some of these training videos, so you can keep self-equipping, and you can actually even use some of these videos for some of your sessions. This is important. Not all equipping is meant to be done by you. In fact, a lot of equipping may not be done by you at all. It may be, as a coach, for some of you that are more introverted, it may be that you're finding resources and using it to train your people. Some of that stuff is stuff that we've created. Some of it may be stuff that you find elsewhere. But it's really important to understand that the equipping doesn't mean it's necessarily coming from you. It's finding the right material. Some of that will come from us. So don't expect for every single time that you equip. It may be, say if you're a coach and you're coaching 5 leaders, you may grab people together and go do dinner together, and you take 10 or 15 minutes and say, hey guys, we're hanging out, we're talking. I want you to watch this video and let's discuss it. And you just watch this video on how to do your area better, and it's maybe a 7-minute video. You put it down, you start to talk about it, you put some plans together. You've just done a communication guide and done the learning loop, and you had fun doing it. All right? So it can be as simple as that. Some of it's going to be longer in a light meeting. Some of it can be just relational. You get together, talk about how things are going, do the little video training, and then the learning loop, which we'll talk about more later, and all of a sudden your people have been cared for and equipped, and eventually they'll be coached as well. So, and then lastly is care. You talk about how can we pray for each other. This is a really important part because prayer matters, and also people feel cared for more when they know that you're praying for them. But prayer does make a difference. That they're praying for you. Convey to your team that you need prayer, so they can pray for you, and you're praying for them. So you should have an example of a short-term huddle and a long-term huddle right there, so you can see kind of what they look like. And I would encourage you guys to keep a lot of this material, the stuff that you get from Growth Track, the stuff that you've gotten from Lead Track and Coach Track, keep it in a binder or keep it in one place so that you can refer to it. Because if you're working with a leader, it's helpful to go back to the material that they're familiar with, so you can have that in one place. We're doing this to help you build kind of a library, your own library of leadership development that you can refer to over and over and over again. So I just want to remind you about the 10 primary responsibilities of a leader. And I know that you guys probably got this in the Lead Track, but it's something that we want to make sure we keep in front of you so that there's a way that you can be intentional about communicating these things. Some of this stuff will happen when people are onboarded. For example, when somebody goes through a Lead Track, they're onboarded to a leadership position, so some of that information is communicated then. Some of them are things that are more ongoing, because there's two types of equipping. Onboarding, when they're first coming in to a position, which we usually use our track system, our Lead Track and Coach Track. But then there's ongoing equipping, and so some of this stuff will fit in there. But just real quick, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because we've covered them before, but I just want to keep this in front of you. Number one is encourage them in their role and faith. You encourage them in the area that they're playing, and also their faith, how they can continue to grow spiritually. Two is talk to them about their specific responsibilities. Obviously, some of this stuff is having a job description and things of that nature. Time commitments, what does that look like? Of course, it's different if somebody's on staff versus if somebody's a leader versus a coach. Those things are different in different areas of ministry. It's all different. How to do the job, role, and task. Like how to do it. What does it look like? The why. Why is this important? Why does this matter to the big picture? Why do we do it this way? That's really important. Who do they report to? Leaders know that they report to their coaches, and their team members know that they're supposed to report to their leader. The ultimate win and team win. Like, what is the ultimate win for that area of ministry? It's important to keep in front of them. Again, celebrate team wins and personal wins. Some of these are built into our communication guides. Follow up and care. And then number 10 is tips to improve and correction. Because there are certain things, I'm sure as someone takes on more responsibility, other things begin to be revealed. And you may sit there and say, all right, this is an area that we probably need to improve on. And there may be things that need to be corrected, meaning maybe it's just they're doing something wrong, or perhaps they have the wrong attitude. So, coach, part of that is to be able to bring about some level of correction. And that's something you're looking for is someone teachable to be able to take correction. So those are important things. Keep a reminder of that if you want to. Post it somewhere and figure out like where are these things happening in your area to make sure that your folks are being communicated to. So we're talking about equipping. So there's a few things that are important. One is what to equip on, and also how and when do you communicate and equip on these things. So here's some areas that are important for coaches to consistently equip on. So one of them would be the core competencies, meaning whatever role that they have, obviously if they're an editor or a greeter or work with kids, the competencies, the areas that person needs to be good at are going to be different depending on where they're serving. So you want to be able to equip on specific core competencies of that area. If they're a leader, there's 5 core competencies, just like there are for coaches. So we do these tracks as kind of a master course. There's all this information. So you, as a coach, and you're coaching your leaders, you want to be familiar with the information on the leadership track. So where they got the stuff in the lead track, you want to break down the different components and equip on the smaller areas consistently. Because you know how it is. We get the information in the track, but no one's going to remember all of that. And some things they'll pick up on, and other things they won't pick up on. So as a coach, you've got to look at and identify as like, all right, this person's obviously doing this well, but here's one area in the lead track, this little area that seems to be something they need to improve on. Or this area of ministry. This area is strong, this area is not. So it's really important that you take the lead track core competencies and break it down over and over again, right? It's something that you're always going to be equipping them on. New people and people who've been on the same team, that there's so much there that you can be equipping on so many nuances of those things for a long period of time. So that's one. Another one is our core values, the core values of the church, to love God, love people, choose joy, pursue excellence, so on and so forth, is you want to make sure that you keep that in front of the leaders and help them keep it in front of their teams. All right? So again, this is an important part of the coach. You're investing into these leaders, but also you're hoping that these leaders are also translating this into their teams. All right? Core skills for a position. All right? This gets into not just the big picture, but the practical things. Like obviously, if you're in worship, how to sing well, how to play well. In youth, how do you communicate differently to youth than you would maybe kids? So honing in specific skills. The vision of the church. This is important. Your team needs to hear about the vision of the church every 30 days. And that may be as simple as in a huddle say, guys, our goal is to see 10,000 lives redeemed, and 10 people gave their heart to the Lord last week, and the role you played helped play a role in that. And sometimes it's a longer perspective. What I mean by that is sometimes in light meetings, we'll do a fuller deep dive into kind of the overarching big picture things of Red Church. Another aspect that you might decide to equip on is our acronym called I Serve. And this helps cultivate a heart of a servant. For example, let's just say that you wanted to drill down in excellence. Let's pursue excellence. You might take I Serve and help equip on what this means. This is what a dream team person looks like. And that's something that you probably want to regularly equip on. Either all of I Serve or pieces of it. So for example, one of the things in Impact it highlights is small things make a big difference. Small things make a big difference. When we pursue excellence and we look at some of the small things, it really does make a difference. If you're on the Connect team, how things smell, how things look, the friendliness and the security of the kids area really goes a long way to parents. Another thing to equip on, maybe management systems. You're looking at the administration of things. Like, maybe someone's a great personality, but things aren't being consistent. So you kind of look at their checklist and their timelines. If someone always late, so you want to equip on their management system. And lastly, just practical skills and spiritual skills. So this just comes up to equipping on different ways to do things both in the role and spiritually. For example, let's just say that you are working with somebody in a small group or in kids ministry or youth or whatever, and two people are talking, and one of them says, you know what, we talked about on Sunday in the service about reading your Bible, and I just find it difficult. Well, you might be able to give specific skills like, you know what, I've had those times, and this is what's helped me. So what you end up doing is you might take the time, some of your equipping time is to just give some things that have helped. Again, it might be a video that you show your team. That's a 3-minute video that really goes a long way. It may be that you text them a video. One of the things that we actually have a tool that you can take a video and send it to your team. And not only does it show you who opened it, it can show you how much of the video they watched, and you can actually have questions. 3 to 5 questions for them to give feedback on. Is this helpful or what have you? So this is a tool that we have that you can send to your team on just a weekly or monthly basis. It's just a little extra level of equipping that you can do. So you might be sitting there going, okay, these are really good. These are things that we can equip on, but how do I know what to focus on? Well, that's important. There's a big picture view of that. What I mean by that is you probably want to touch on all of these things. So you might want to kind of look at it from a from a weekly or monthly, semesterly, yearly perspective of seeing like, okay, I want to make sure I touch on all these main points at least once every year, but there are times you're going to have to drill down into some of these areas and say, we need to take an entire light meeting, or we need to take an entire month every Sunday to focus on this for 5 minutes. And that may be the case in your area of ministry. So here's some questions to help you process where and what to equip on. What is the biggest weakness for your team? Like, what is the area where they're just struggling? This is obviously not happening very well. All right, that's probably an area you need to equip on. Number 2 is, where are you seeing stress points? See, what we've seen is that every time we grow or every time there's a transition, typically the areas that are the weakest are the areas that we need to equip the most on. Because it just so happens that when you grow or there's a transition, those tension points are what are revealed. So often they're probably could be seen even before the growth or even before the transition, but they become more obvious. So you have to understand whenever an area grows or the church grows or there's a transition, that this is going to happen. So you'd be looking, where are the stress points right now? Where are things not happening? You don't want to assume it's just going to go away. It probably won't. You're going to have to deal with it then. If you keep delaying it, it's probably going to grow. Next is this: what is your biggest opportunity for your team? See, equipping is not just problem solving. Equipping is like, all right, here's some awesome opportunities. These are some unique things that we're actually striving in or growing in. Like, wow, we actually have 3 people that are really good at this. Maybe we could do it this way. All right? So you want to look for opportunities as well. And maybe if you ask yourself those 3 questions, it might be able to help you kind of know what to equip on. So we talked about equipping. Now we're going to talk about coaching. And there's 2 primary ways that we coach. Number 1 is one-on-ones, or some of these things could be 1-on-2s and 1-on-3s depending on your area of ministry. For example, if you're a coach for small groups and you have 3 brand new small group leaders, you might be able to meet with them initially as a group. Now, it's important to have one-on-one time as time goes on, because there's going to be conversations you need to have with them that can only be done in a one-on-one situation. So, but these are times, there are moments where you might have to, do a 1-on-2 or 1-on-3, but most of them are going to happen in one-on-ones. The other moments of coaching are in the moment type of situations. That's where you just happen to see something and you're in the trenches with them, and you can sit there and say, well, what about this? And you can process that, all right? So those are the 2 primary ways that you're coaching. So we gave you kind of a communication guide for huddles that are built more for equipping, and we're also going to give you this kind of roadmap for your coaching segments. And so this is a very simple thing. It's flexible in how you can use it, but it gives you kind of the main points that are helpful when you do a one-on-one coaching session. So number 1 is discuss. You kind of open up and say, hey, here are some of the announcements that's going on. Be aware of this. We're going to be having a huddle then. You want to be processing that with your team. Also be talking about information they need to know. By the way, the Connect team is going to be changing the way they do the bulletins. This might impact how we do small groups. So I just want you to be aware of that. And then you want to highlight the purpose of the coaching session. My goal is to connect with you, just see how you're doing. And I also want to take a moment to kind of equip you on this one thing that I think is going to help the rest of our team if all of us can get stronger in this, or whatever it might be. You're explaining kind of the purpose of the conversation. And then you go into discover, that you want to talk to them about how they're doing. So you build relationships, how they do in their personal life. If they're married, what's going on in their marriage. If they're not, how are they doing in their single life? What's going on with school or work or things of that nature? How are they doing in their spiritual life? How are their spiritual disciplines? Any questions that's come up, or some victories that might have happened. You're also processing ministry life. Like, how's it going in your area of ministry? How's your team doing? Are there any problem areas? So you want to hit those main points, their regular life, their spiritual life, and the ministry life. That's really important to kind of get moving in that direction. So here's some some tips. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're all listed in your handout. And these are just meant to help you as guides in these particular areas. Because I know some of you guys kind of naturally process some of this, and some of you need practical examples to help kind of hang your hat on this concept. So they're there for that. But number one is listen deeply, right? Ask good questions. Make eye contact, all right? Especially if they're talking about something that's sensitive or something that's troubling or whatever. You want to make sure that you're using your nonverbals, where you're nodding your head or you're expressing empathy or sympathy for them. It's important, though, if someone cries, and obviously most of your coaching sessions people won't cry, but invariably somebody's going to cry because something's going to happen in their life. The number one thing you don't do, okay? The number one thing you don't do if someone cries is make a joke. Because some people feel uncomfortable to make a joke to kind of lighthearten it, make it lighthearted. That's not the time to do that. All right? You just listen. Just sit there and listen. You might encourage them to say, "It's all right. Let it go. Let it out. Take your time." All right? But you don't make a joke about it. All right? You just let it sit. So that's an important thing. One of the key things here it says is that ask permission to move deeper. For example, if they're upset about something else, one of the ways to say, like, I kind of see that, and I can kind of see why that might be frustrating, but would it be okay if I try to dig a little bit deeper there? Why do you think that's such a big deal? Like, why do you think that's such a strong reaction? And just see if it goes any deeper. This might actually be a tool where you use the 5 whys. We use that in the leadership track where you're like, why do you think that is? Well, why is that? Because it's a tool that Toyota actually came up with to try to get to the root of a problem. So if you come up with that situation, just remember, a lot of the tools that we gave you in the lead track are still relevant to what you're doing now. That 5 whys would be really good when you're handling some situations that you're trying to figure out. The other thing is be an encourager. What they've done well, encourage what's going on with their family, if you can. When they handle a difficult situation, encourage. Next is provide care. Listening, providing care, praying for them. It's really important, though, that you understand and recognize when you're out of your depths. If there's a situation going on, it's okay to ask for help. This is important. You never get in a situation where you make a promise that you won't tell somebody, because you may need help and you may need to get somebody else in. So if somebody sits there and goes, "I'll tell you something, but you have to promise never to tell anybody," you never make that promise. Even in a counseling setting, there are certain things that you can't promise. If they're going to hurt somebody, or if there's danger for a child or something along those lines, there are certain things that that you're obligated to be able to share. Ministry is the same thing. You may need to get help. So you may need to, if you're a coach and there's a situation you don't know how to deal with it, your first step then at that point is go to your director and process how and where you can get some help. So your first step is not to go to another coach. Your first step is to go to your director, and then maybe you involve somebody else who might be able to help you with that situation. All right, the next thing, so we've talked about discuss, we've talked about discover. The next thing is develop. So in most of your coaching sessions, this is where you're going to spend most of your time. You've discussed kind of the overview. That's a short amount of time. There's going to be times when the discovery takes longer, but that should not be the regular. What I mean by that is if it's always a drama session, you'll actually never get to develop them, and that's a whole different thing. But we all know that some people go through seasons where that may be more of the time frame. But this is likely where you're going to spend most of your time. Because coaching is not just caring for them, although that's part of it. Coaching is also developing them. Now, obviously, if somebody just sat there and they just lost a spouse or a loved one or something like that happened, you're probably not going to move into this section. But most of the time, you're going to spend a little bit of time in the discussing, a little bit more time in the discovery, and then most of your time in your one-on-one is going to happen in the development where you're doing skill development. Again, this section right here is where you also would do the learning loop, where you talk about a specific skill, you teach it, you talk about it, they try it, they come back. So we're going to talk again about that in just a moment. This is also a time where you evaluate. where you talk to them about areas where they're doing well and areas where they likely need to improve. If you don't evaluate your leaders or who you're leading, they'll never really rise up to what they can be. So you have to give some level of evaluation. This is working. This isn't working. Where might be the roadblock to you doing better at this? And this also may be problem solving. So, for example, if you get into the discovery section and you find out, the life's good, their spiritual life is good, but ministry, there's somebody on their team that's driving them crazy. Well, then you may need to problem solve. So the development may be helping them coach on how to handle that situation. So it's maybe developing a skill, problem solving, evaluating. So that's where that section is. And then lastly is dream. Help your leaders find vision. Help them to understand how important what they do matters. The why of what they do matters. As a ministry, so you're really impacting people's lives, and you can even point to specific situations. But you also highlight the why in their own life. Understand, since I've seen you do this, you've grown not only in ministry, you've grown as a father, you've grown as a friend, you've grown spiritually. This is helping you be more responsible. You highlight to them the ultimate why, like the why we're doing this as a church and honoring God. We highlight the why in their area of ministry. We highlight the why in their personal lives. You clarify the vision. You inspire. Can you see how far we've come in this? And so you want to make sure they leave inspired from the vision by why this is important, why this connects to the bigger picture. It's really important that you keep the vision in front of your leaders every 30 days, because studies have shown that if someone is not in front of the vision every 30 days, that vision leaks, meaning they'll lose passion for it. They'll actually start to lead people in an opposite direction. And also you have more conflict in regards to that. When you clarify the vision, there's a time when we realized that there were some people chirping because we were in a church plant, we're in a set up tear down situation, and were actually pretty good people, but they were causing issues, and I realized we didn't do a good job keeping the vision in front of people. So what we did is we started to have our light meetings, and then I started to share, this is why we do it this way and why we don't do it that way. And then as you started to equip, most people are like, okay, I get it. Even if they would prefer something different, now that they understood the why, they could at least get behind it. So that's important for your teams as well, is you got to make sure that vision stays in front of them. That's why your one-on-ones are so important. So the 4 categories for the agenda for your one-on-one goes something a little bit like this. It goes, discuss is about 5 to 10%. Discover is going to be about 10 to 15% in most meetings. Develop is going to be 60 to 75%. And then dream is going to be about 10 to 15%. And again, those are obviously, we give percentages because every conversation goes a little bit differently. But it should be in your one-on-one agenda handout as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give you some coaching tools. So again, we are creating multiple equipping videos to help you ongoing for you yourself, and also for videos for you to show with your leaders as well. And so we're going to cover some of the tools that we think are really important, but we're also going to have ongoing skills that you can pull up and you can self-develop as you watch them with yourself or with your team. So we have a page where you can go to all these different links and get further coaching tools. But right now, we're going to focus on the most important tools. So the first tool you're going to learn about is what we call the learning loop. And I've mentioned it before in this session, but also you've talked about it in the leadership track. So many of you guys are already familiar with it. But the learning loop is the most important thing if you're going to be a coach, because it's part of your equipping, it's part of your coaching. If this is missing, you probably will not be as effective as a coach. And it's the same thing for your leaders. They're probably not going to be as effective without this actually happening. So right here, we're going to talk to you about the learning loop. Again, this is the most important part of this. So if you would, take notes, pay attention. If you don't understand this, please find out what you need to know. Make sure you know what you need to know so that you can do this well.
So one of the most important, or the most important tool that we have in our coaching tool belt is the learning loop. So I'm going to go over the 4 sections, the 4 steps of the learning loop, and then we're going to give some examples and some times that you would use this in context of your role as a coach. So the first step of the learning loop is to teach. You take this opportunity to show the person how to do what they're doing. Depending on the context, maybe if you're a worship coach, you're coaching a leader on how to lead worship. You're coaching a vocal leader on actually how to lead a song, how to communicate with the band, how to communicate with the band leader, how to communicate with other vocalists to make sure they know where you're going. You'd be showing them how to do it. They would watch you lead a song, for example. Then the next step is talk. Talk about what they observed. This is a great time for you to hear what they are perceiving, or maybe if they missed something, they thought you did one thing, but really the focus was supposed to be something else, kind of talking about what they observed, getting any questions that they may have answered. Then you allow them to try. Maybe they try leading a song in this, still using this example of leading worship. They try leading a song, and you observe them doing so. And then finally, tell. You ask questions and give feedback to them about what you observed. So here's some good questions to ask when you're giving feedback to someone who's trying something that they're learning from you. Number 1, what did you learn? And let them answer. Well, I learned that it's important where I stand when I'm leading a song so that I can be visible to the band leader, so I can be visible to other vocalists, so that they can see any signals that I give. The next question is, what was the greatest challenge for you? Maybe they say, it was really hard for me to think about the next part of the song that I needed to go to and think about everybody else and somehow listen to the Holy Spirit in the middle of all of that. It was just really hard there was a lot of different pieces I had to think about, and that was just kind of hard for me. That was a challenge for me. And then finally ask them, what questions do you have? Maybe at this point they have questions that they didn't think of before because they actually got to do it. For a lot of us, getting to do something is kind of the first time we really think about a lot of things, because we learn by doing. A lot of people learn by doing. I know I do. So there are several opportunities for using the learning loop. Obviously, we talk about this in the lead track. Part of the format of the lead track is our leaders go in, we teach them, we have times where we talk about what we're learning, and then we give them homework to go try it in context, whether they're shadowing a leader, another leader rather, or whether they're watching, or whether they're being shadowed, being watched by someone else. They have an opportunity to try something, and then they come back to their next session, and we review. We talk about what they learned. We talk about the challenges that maybe they had using, for example, the management system or something like that. We do the same thing here in Coach Track. That's why we have homework. That's why we have reviews, so that we're constantly activating what we're learning, getting feedback on how we're doing, and improving it. Pastor Jace mentioned in another segment that there are 2 opportunities for equipping. One of them is onboarding, and one of them is ongoing. So when someone is onboarding to a new role, just like we just talked about with Lead Track or maybe with Coach Track, they're onboarding. We want that learning loop to be present, because it is important how you learn something the first time, that you're really getting it, you're activating it, it makes sense, and that you're able to ask questions. I can't tell you how many times I've had questions about something, but I haven't asked them. I just kind of assumed I knew what I was doing. I just kind of plowed forward. But if I had taken the time to actually ask questions and get feedback, it would have improved that skill. It would have improved that competency, or even a role that I had right away, and it would have been better long term. Same thing with ongoing equipping. Anytime you as a coach are equipping your leaders in a certain competency, you want to take the time to actually talk about it after you do the initial teaching. You want to give them a chance to try it in context of life and follow up and say, hey, how did it go when you were practicing the competency of effective communication that we talked about last week? You were going to do a huddle with your team. How did that go? So we want, at every stage and every area of equipping, whether it's onboarding like Lead Track or Coach Track, or ongoing like our light meeting huddles or our semesterly huddles, we want to be implementing the Lead Track, because implementing the learning loop. Because if I know for me, if information is just thrown at me and I'm never kind of held accountable to that or asked if I'm doing it or how that's going for me, it doesn't have the impact on me. It doesn't really change me. It doesn't really become part of me. So that's why the learning loop is so important.
So again, that learning loop is so important. And now I'm going to also go to another segment that goes a little bit deeper in figuring out who do you develop, how do you do it, some of these other key aspects that will help you do all of these other things that we're talking about equipping and coaching better. So again, take notes and get equipped right now. So if you're going to develop people, first of all, you have to have a plan. What does that look like? So you have to identify who you're working with, like who am I going to develop? And what am I going to develop them to do? So there's two sides in a church, there's two sides of development. There's the spiritual development, but then there's the practical skills element. All right? So obviously, part of development is helping them get into the right small group, help them to, if you identify something off in their life, challenging it in love, having conversations, develop that relationship. But at the same time, you have to figure out what skill set, and then you have to figure out how are you going to develop them. We have some things that are built in at our, with what we do. We have a growth track, which gets people into initially serving. We have a lead track to help get people to start to lead. But here's the thing. There's onboarding processes. Once you do growth track, then you onboard to a team. After you do lead track, there should be onboarding to a leadership role. Right now what I've seen is people have gone through lead track and often nothing else happens. In some cases, like we had a bunch of people formerly part of Connect at one point that went through lead track, but I think we didn't do a great job of onboarding someone to a first impressions leader or a greeter leader. We have to make sure that onboarding works. All right? So you need to know what you're trying to equip them for, which means you need to identify what are the core competencies and skills that they need for that particular role. And you develop them towards that. One of the key things is it's better to focus on one competency or skill at a time. So develop them. Figure out if it's editing, figure out a game plan, and then you have to calendar it. You have to process, you have to have an entire strategy of development, meaning on a yearly basis, a quarterly basis, or we basically use a trimester basis, a monthly basis, a weekly basis, something like that. So for example, if you do one huge training a year, or you invite them to a conference, say there's a conference just on family ministries, or a conference just on Sunday morning or online stuff, whatever it is, once a year. Then you have trimesters. This is where you get people and you highlight these big types of trainings, whether it's I'm not sure, you guys would have to figure out what that would look like on a trimester basis. Then you have a monthly basis, which is what we have light meetings already built in. We have a monthly training we call light meetings. Is once a month, you guys should be taking the time to develop your team as a whole. Then on a weekly basis, like, are you guys taking your huddles to develop people? Are you guys sending out those videos from, we use Right Now Media, where there's a video training of like 2 to 5 minutes, because Right Now Media can tell you if they watched it or not. There's a little assessment, like a little answers that you can tell if they watched it or not, and get feedback from them. If you don't have a plan and schedule it, then you're never going to develop people. What's going to happen is you're just going to go from one fire to the next. You have to have and know that if you're in a coach level or a director level, development is one of the top 3, 4, 5 responsibilities you have. Because if you don't do that, then delegation won't work. You won't have anybody to delegate to. In fact, all you'll do is delegate to each other. You'll delegate to other coaches and other directors. Whenever you're delegating to the same people right next to you is a sign that you've not done any development. Because you can't sit there and say, like, oh, well, it's easy for me to delegate to people who are on staff. No. Most of our church will never be on staff. Most of it will be volunteers on our dream teams. So you got to intentionally develop them. So part of that is, if you're a coach, you have to know, if you're developing a new leader, you have to know the leadership competencies. But you also need to know what the skills are. Whether it's something specialized like editing or kids or youth or greeting, you have to know what those specific skills are and how to develop them. And that takes classes, we have tracks, but it also takes you spending time with them. You have to show them, you have to coach them and tell them. All right? That's why we have that whole learning loop in place. You have to be experts in the learning loop. It's fundamental and is core to what you're doing in developing people. If you're not, if I were you, I'd be like pasting the learning loop in front of you everywhere you go. If you need to delegate, you have to develop. Well, how do you develop? It's the learning loop. If you're not being intentional about the learning loop, you're never gonna have anybody to delegate to. So in the beginning of the church, I almost led everything. I didn't lead worship, but I was more actively involved in how that went on a regular basis. So every time I've had to let something go, I've had to recognize that it likely won't be done as well as when I would have done it. Now, you have to process to what degree you're willing to drop down. Like if you drop down from, I'm not saying 100%, because there are people, as you guys get into more roles, as time has gone on, there's been people better than me at a lot of these things. But in the beginning, it wasn't so much that way. And so let's just say we start out at 100%, and I'm not saying it's like perfect, but let's just say we're gauging that. You can maybe accept an 80%, maybe 75%. You dropping down below that, it's not worth it. You can't do it. But then you have to develop, you have to figure out, well, maybe you don't start, it depends on gifting and it depends on steps, right? So like, at what step do they need to know X, Y, and Z? Or if you're asking them to know a lot of X, Y, and Z, do they even know the foundations first? But if you don't develop, you're always gonna be doing it. And eventually those people can become better than you at it. But it takes time. You have to actually, that's what I'm talking about, scheduling. As you figure out your schedule, it's not just like you train them once and then it's done. That's why this relational component is so important. If you go through the lead track and that's all you ever do, then they're not gonna know enough of what they need to know. You have to constantly be spending time with them and making that happen. So coaches are meant to be doing that with the leaders, and the directors need to be doing that with the coaches. If it didn't work the last time, either they weren't a right fit, or you didn't equip them well enough, or there was something in the system, or it wasn't the initial training, it was the ongoing training. You always have to be processing onboarding, how do we get them started, and ongoing. And you have to schedule that out. It needs to be an active part of your management system where you're taking time to process your development of people. All right, this next tool is, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Like if you hit a wall and you don't know how to handle it, we've developed a tool that actually was inspired by my friend Tom Crick, who had something similar. And so all of a sudden I saw what they did with that, and then we saw actually a way to take that concept and make it our own, which would be more relevant to what we do. But here's a very simple tool on what do you do when you hit a wall and you don't know what to do. So I hope this is something that's helpful. Hello everyone, we're here to do some equipping. And so what I want to begin to talk about today is, what do you do when you hit a wall and you don't know what to do? So I'm going to be interacting with some of our folks here, and that's kind of who I'm talking to, but I'm glad that you're able to join us here with this. If you have questions, you can comment or reach out to us. We'll do our best to answer the questions. But this first section is something that I think maybe helpful to a lot of our leaders, because often what I see is that people often hit a wall, and when they hit a wall, they often stop. They don't know what to do, so they just stop. One of the greatest reasons why things don't get done is because people don't know how to do it, so they stop. And so this is something, it's been true in my life. There are times I'm like, I'm not sure how to do this, and then I stop. But by nature, when I come to a wall or a dead end, I look for a door, I look for a window, I look for a crack. Like there has to be a way around this. And there have been times in my life where like God has like purposely not allowed me to move forward. And then there are other times when that perseverance has actually led to an advancement of something that I didn't see a solution to. And so I want to give you a tool that will help you identify what to do when you hit a wall. Because there are some things that cannot stop. There are some things that cannot drop. And so when we're moving forward, it's actually to some degree a spiritual discipline of perseverance. And if someone has a lack of endurance or spiritual endurance, it's easy to give up. And so there is a spiritual component to perseverance to keep moving on. There is a spiritual tenacity, so to speak. And so if you're taking notes, I'm going to have you write this down as, what do you do when you get stuck or hit a wall? This is especially true in a leadership position in ministry, although I think the principles are still true in our personal lives as well. So if you're taking notes, you can, I think, relate on both ends. So I have this kind of phrase, and I'm borrowing the phrase from our friend Tom Crick. Tom Crick's a friend of mine. He was out at Saddleback for about 20 or so years, and he sent this to me, and so the concept came from him, but I changed a lot of things around from some of the stuff that's been true in my life, but the seed of it came from him, and it was very, very, very helpful. In fact, the last 2 on here, or 3 on here, are directly from him, or at least I think there's 2 of them directly from him. But the rest of them were more of like seeds planted. But I think it's a really good tool. Had he not sent this, I don't think I would have, this would have been clear to me. But I basically, within this, was trying to communicate how I've seen God come through in this way for me, and how I keep moving forward in this. So you can use it how it works for you. But essentially, the word is God's power. God's power. All right? So this obviously represents here, the G is to remember this, is God is building his church. Jesus tells us that he's building his church. What that means theologically and practically is that he's advancing his church, and he will provide what we need. One of the biggest problems that people have in churches is like, we just can't do this, we don't have enough. And there's a reality there. There are some things that in the present you might not be able to do, because there is a limitation in finances and resources of people or know-how or what have you. But often we use this as an excuse why we can't do something. But we have to remember, God is building his church, and what that means is God will provide what we need. One is, maybe it's a timing thing, or 2, maybe we're just not seeing what's in front of us. It may be, number 3, maybe a stewardship thing, that if we're better stewards over certain areas, we would have those things. What I have found is I like to know the full step of everything, but what I've found is that often, as I'm faithful in what I know to do, he'll reveal the next thing. So if we're not good stewards in our area, we might not see what's right in front of us. So it's really, really important. That's where stewardship, where we talk about systems and making sure we're faithful in what God has given us, because stewardship involves systems. I don't know how you can steward something well without some level of system. We all have a system, just some systems stink. Because a system is something that you just do repeatedly, and so if your system is to never, like, I'm just going to read the Bible whenever I feel like it, that's a system. It's a pretty ineffective system, but it's a system. All right? So one is, we have to remind ourselves that God is building his church. He will provide what we need. This goes into the next one. Is God owns everything. God has no limitations. All right? So whenever we're feeling down and we've hit a wall, one is remember that God is building his church, he will provide, and two is he owns everything. If we get lost in what we don't have, then that can really kill vision. I can't tell you how many times we've taken steps of faith and God's really come through. So O is owns everything. So God owns everything. That's the second one. Another example of this is when we first got our first building, there was we had a big issue. We had a roof issue over the kids area. And we didn't have the money. All the money was gone. As far as, because we had a very shoestring budget. We were going to come just in under it. And when we had the roof issue, it was like, do we close down or not? And we're like, no. It was around December. We had to make a decision because we were opening in January. And we'd already had mailers and announcements and stuff like, Lord, we need to move forward with this. You own everything. We need you to help provide this. And I think it was Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. Somebody called me out of blue who barely goes to at that time was inconsistent with the church, but came occasionally, and wanted to give us a generous gift, and it was, they paid for more than enough to cover the roof. So God was faithful. God owns everything. The next letter, the third level, is he's a disciple maker. What that means is God is using these circumstances to grow us, to mature us. So that's one of the reasons why we call people to serve in dream teams. We did a sermon series made for Mondays, and I believe it was the last week of the series, we talked about how one of the 7 deadly sins is the deadly sin of acedia. And that's what the word we get sloth. And we think sloth is lazy, and it can be lazy, but that's not the full meaning. The full meaning of that deadly sin is I'm only going to do if it's what's in it for me. I'm only going to do if it's good for me. It's a person who only sees through their interests, their dreams, what they want. And that's how our culture sees everything. Our jobs, what's in it for me? Follow your dream, what's in it for me? We carry that into marriages. We carry that into our families. We carry that into our jobs and careers. We carry that into churches, right? That is one of the 7 deadly sins. And so serving, and whether it's on staff or within a church, helps us to become more like Christ because it's a constant reminder and us growing that it's not all about us. We do what we do to honor God and to serve others. And so we got to remember that what we're going through is a disciple-making process that God has you on. Because if you don't see it that way, when you hit a wall, you'll get angry and you'll blame your boss, you'll blame God, sometimes you'll just beat yourself up. We'll blame somebody else that left you holding the bag or whatever it is. We have to remember that whatever you're facing, God is using it to grow you. So when you get stuck, God is building his church. He owns everything. It's a disciple-making tool. And then next is start strong. And it goes on to start strong, stay strong, finish strong. The reminder is God is entrusting you with what he's given. In my context, is God's entrusted me to advance the kingdom of God in his church. For those of you, if you're on a dream team or what have you, God's entrusting you that area of ministry. For those of you that are online and maybe you're not involved in any of those things, God has given you influence in your areas, entrusting you to these things. So we are to start strong, give it our best. Don't give up, don't give in, and finish strong. So these are the first level is just spiritually reminding that God's ultimately in control. And then the next part, we get into more of the practical stuff. All right? But I think that that's really important, that those 4 things, God's power in that breakdown is really important to remember. And I would encourage you to place that, maybe it's on your computer or maybe it's on your desk or somewhere to keep in front of you, because when you hit a wall, you're going to need this. This is something that's a very hopeful tool. Maybe it's a part of your daily startup routine or prayer time or something along those lines. All right, let's get into the second part, which is power. First of all, it's P is pray. Ask for direction and provision. So we remind ourselves of these other things. God's building his church. It's a disciple-making process. Then we get into activity. What do? We begin by praying, Lord, I need help. I need discernment. You know me. I believe in strategic thinking. I planning, all of those things. But we start everything by praying. Like, Lord, give us direction, give us wisdom. Would you help me figure this out? I've hit a wall. It's not good stewardship just to stop and drop it. Okay. So pray, Lord. What's the next thing? O is overview. Get an overview of things, overview systems, people, past research, processes. Mainly, like, the point of this is, let's say you have a building problem, or you're trying to figure out something in your area of ministry, or maybe you have a financial problem, or whatever the situation is, get in front of you all the pieces that you need to see. For example, if it's if you're having an issue with your team, pull out your systems, pull out your We Care, pull out, ideas or brainstorming stuff from the past. Get it in front of you. I like to sometimes use a whiteboard and write it up there. Sometimes if I have something in front of me, I'll place all the pieces in front of me and just kind of review what I have. Because sometimes I realize I've already solved this problem, but I put it in my notes somewhere and I need to find it, and I'm like, oh, it's already there. At the same time, you get to see the overview. Again, from our area, that'd be kind of looking at our We Care system, our management system. Sometimes if it's a personal situation, like if you're dealing with a person and you're trying to help them, maybe you pull out their church team's profile or whatever you have on them, their personality profiles. So you get in front of yourself, the notes that are there, what you know about that person or situation, and sometimes things just become alive. If you're working as a team, you put it on a board so you can all see it together, because for you it may connect, but for someone else you may see it. And sometimes by putting it out there, you can start to see connections. That's why, oftentimes, you see in TV shows how they have pictures connected to situations, because it helps you to look at timelines and see things that you didn't realize were there. So you pray, and then you pull out everything you know of the situation. Get it in front of you, go over it, review it. So right now, even when we're going through like growth track or lead track stuff, what I coached our serve director is pull out our past research, pull out the videos on this, pull out the past notes on this, and review it, because sometimes things pop out that we forgot, and the solutions are already there, we just forgot about them. All right? Next thing, the W is, if you're still hit a wall and you don't know where to go, and you've prayed about it, you start to do an overview, is you ask yourself, who does this well? The W is, who does this well? It's never a solution just to drop it. If you can't figure it out, and sometimes I do this even if I think I have a lead on something, even sometimes if I think I know the direction, I'm like, who does this well? Pastors in my life, one of the things they say about me is I'm one of the most inquisitive people they've ever met, because I'm always asking questions. What about this? How did you do that? What about this, and why that? Do you have any receipts for this? When you went through this, how did this go? All right, it's wise counsel. But who does this well? Now, you may be facing something that's multi-tiered. So there may be a systems issue, there may be kind of a vision issue, there may be a theological issue, there may be a communication issue. So you may need to actually ask multiple people. It may not just be one person. So if you're problem solving, you hit a wall, one of the things you have to do, if you've not done this, then you've really not moved forward to any practical solutions. So this is, again, a very helpful tool for when we hit a wall. The next one is educate yourself. That is, read, research, ask questions. Just do a bunch of research, Google search, podcasts. Now, part of the way you help do this is by setting forth your own equipping system, meaning that you're self-equipping. So what are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading? What YouTube channels are you watching that help with this area? What do your devotionals look like? What does your prayer life look like? Like, how are you self-equipping? Because if you're just in the moment and just doing what's in front of you, you will not. You'll be running on fumes, and you will hurt yourself and everyone around you. So, but even if you do that, sometimes you're going to be like, I hit a wall, I don't know what to do. Where do I go from here? So, like, we run into walls sometimes, And I can't tell you how many times I'm on phone calls with pastors and other people I know of, like, hey, what did you do here? How did this work? What about this and what about that? All the time. It's never been like I have all the answers, and therefore it's a constant learning process. Now, as you do that over a period of time, you start to learn stuff, and you can start to communicate things that you've learned along the way. But the only way I've been able to do that is by asking those questions. And I continually have to do that because it's like every step, like, we've been through a building project, but before we did it, we never went through a merge process before. Well, we've done it. Well, how do we do that? We got feedback from other people. We got coaching on how to, the steps and process. I think if we would have tried to do it on our own, it would have been a hot mess. Same thing when it goes into building buildings and working on projects. That's why I like to pull people in, especially depending on backgrounds and experiences. Who does it well? Not who does it poorly. You don't go to someone who doesn't do something well. Like, you might respect how someone handles finances, but you may not respect how they handle their marriage, right? Or you may someone who's very creative, but perhaps they're not the one to teach you how to use an Excel sheet, right? So you got to know go to someone who does it well. Educate yourself, both when you come to the problem and ongoing. And then lastly, the R is review. Review next steps. Ideas without actions. Write this down if you can. Ideas without action suffocates vision, burns people out, loses people, and frustrates yourself. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools we already have in regards to how to deal with problems, because whenever you work with people, there's going to be problems. And so these are just tools that we want to have in your tool belt so that when you hit them, you kind of know how to deal with them. One of these tools is what we call reframing, and that is helping people see things differently. And this is, I think, been one of the most helpful tools that I've used as a pastor, is because sometimes people are viewing a situation or other people in a way that there's really no way to get out of it unless you reframe it in a way that they can see it differently. So this was a reframing thing that we had to do as a staff. We had kind of outgrown our building, and we're grateful because God gave us a building, and it was amazing, but we were stuck. And so it was like, okay, we didn't have the finances we needed to actually build expansion or whatever. And so it was very frustrating, and it was actually very discouraging, but there had to be a reframe. And that reframe was like, all right, we know God's going to build His church. We know He's going to provide. So we've got to change our perspective from this can't happen to God's going to show a way. And shortly after that, an opportunity came open with the church next door to us to merge, which allowed us to grow because their building was 3 times the size of ours. And so that was a reframe. A simple reframe could be something like this, where someone's complaining on the Connect team because it's cold outside. And there's nothing that will kill a vibe of Connect if someone's just complaining about stuff. So you got to make sure, if you're in the Connect team, that it's because you are the face, you're the inspiration. So one of the ways that you frame that is like, you know what, it's chilly, but you know what, I'm so grateful that there's sunshine outside. Or you reframe it this way, like, you know what, you're right, it's a bit chilly. However, what we have found out is it actually blesses people even more, the fact that we will greet them even when it's cold. That's happened even when it's raining, that people actually are blessed. We've had people drive by and they see our teams when it's cold or when it's raining, and they're like, wow, those people they really believe what they're doing. So by us being out there doing that, it really blesses other people. That's how you reframe it. You take the negative and you're not denying reality. You're just saying, here's another way to look at it. Here's another way to look at it. We have situations where someone's like, I don't like this particular role that I'm playing, and there may be a chance to kind of help them transition, but sometimes I've put people in situations to help them grow and say, you're right, I understand that this is not where your love is, but you know what? I know kind of what you're passionate about, but in order for you to do that well, there's some skills that you need to develop, so we're giving you this opportunity to help develop those skills so when you get to this step, you're able to actually accomplish that, what's in your heart to do. So it's important. Reframing is helping people see things in a different way. Sometimes that is biblically, meaning like, see, what you're saying isn't biblical, but this is what the Word of God says, and there's a lot more life if you actually see what it says. It may be practical, it may be skills, it may be big picture, it may be attitude, but reframing is very, very helpful. Another thing that you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with problems is that often what seems like the problem isn't the real problem. And so often, people who are even sharing their problem aren't aware that that's not the real problem. In the movie Moneyball, the Oakland A's had just lost to the Yankees, and the Yankees spent tons of money, because in baseball at the time, there was no salary cap, and so the Yankees could spend as much money as they want, and I think they spent like $140 million on their team, where the Oakland A's could only afford maybe $38 million. So it's almost $100 million difference, and the general manager, played by Brad Pitt, was so angry. He comes to the scouts, and the scouts, in addition to that, they've lost their three best players, Johnny Damon, Giambi, and some others. And so they're trying to replace these players with inferior players. And he kept saying, what's the problem? And they said, well, we need to replace this. We need to replace that. He's like, no, what's the problem? He realized that they didn't understand that the problem wasn't really the problem. He realized that the problem wasn't that they have players that they have to replace. The problem was that the game was unfair, that some teams could spend more than they could. So if they played the game the same way, they would never win anything. So that's actually where he ended up finding a guy who did analytics. And it changed not only baseball forever, it changed sports forever. Even now, football, basketball, baseball, everything has changed because of analytics, because he figured out that the problem really wasn't the problem. And most of the time, that's the truth with people. There's a spiritual problem they're not seeing. There's a different issue that they're not seeing. There's an offense that they're not seeing. So you have to try to get to the root of the issue. And so this video does a short little blurb here on a little bit more of how to help see beyond the surface problem. Again, another tool that might help with this is using the why. You might not even share with people that you're using the why, the 5 whys, but it's something helpful like, okay, well, why is that? Okay, I see that, but why do you think that is? But again, here's a video. Watch it. It might help you do some problem solving. We actually have a problem solving worksheet that we give out in Lead Track, but we also want to give it to you again here at Coach Track because, again, you're going to deal with people. You're going to have this. And this is something that can help you use the 5 whys to help get to the root of the issue. But again, here's this video that will help you, again, to problem solve some of the situations. Could I get someone to pull up Galatians 3 and read verses 1 through 5?
You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Have you experienced so much in vain if it really was in vain? So again, I ask, does God give you His Spirit and work miracles among you by the works of the law or by your believing what you heard?
So here, Paul's talking to the Galatians, which it's a very interesting place. Galatia, so they're over the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire has basically this thing that if everybody serves multiple gods. So it was normal to serve. You could not get away from it. You go to every house, every place, there's multiple gods everywhere. And their belief system was that if something bad happened, a plague, a war, then they believe basically somebody screwed up. Like, God's punishing us, we screwed up. And they'll look to people who didn't worship properly and blame them. And so that was something that was a kind of a common thing. And the weird thing is that the Jews had an exception, because they knew that the Jews would rather die than worship multiple gods because they worship one God. So they made a deal that they could worship the one God as long as they pray for the empire and the emperor. So there's this deal. And then Christians are now coming in, and initially they're counted as Jews. But what's going on here is that the Galatians came out of this pagan culture, and so they're coming out of that. So a lot of this false teaching that's going on is not necessarily paganism, although
that exist, and that shows up in other parts of the New Testament, and Paul deals with that at length at various times. But what's happening is they're getting swung the other way into legalism, into kind of a Judaizer kind of situation. And what that is that in order to be saved, you also have to be Jewish. You have to be circumcised. You have to do all the things that we did as Jews. And what Paul's saying is, no, like, what are you doing? He's like, first of all, you're condemned under the law. So you're saying that in order to have Jesus, you have to live the law. But the problem is the law condemns you. If you add circumcision to Jesus, you actually lose Jesus, meaning Jesus really isn't your Savior. And that's really the issue. The gospel, there's a big problem with the gospel in the sense that we take the gospel plus anything else loses the gospel. There's an illustration where I was thinking about it this morning in my prayer time, that there's 3 paths in front of you. And the one on the left and one on the right, you don't realize at the time, but when you go into it, is a maze. And it's not like a fun maze. It's a maze that's dead end, and it's bars. It's actually, if you look at it from the top view, it's actually a prison, both of them. One is sin, sexual immorality, no morality. It's just do whatever you want. It's a trap. We're enslaved. But the same is true for legalism. It's a trap. The only path ahead is the gospel. The gospel is the only path. So when he's talking about human effort, actually, it's highlighting in your flesh, or it's basically, it's not exactly the same word, but you guys have heard us talk about the sarx. It's basically the sarx, but it's a different version of the word. And the sarx is the flesh. So he's saying that what you're trying to do, the circumcision, is a works of the flesh. You were literally trying to save yourself. So you are literally dismissing Christ, and you're going back in to the world, because legalism can't save you. You cannot save yourself. And that's really something that we struggle with probably a lot in our life and don't realize it. Most of the issues that we deal with, or the problems that we create, is because of self-saviors. If I can make enough money, then I'll have approval and I can save myself. I'll have prestige. Or if I could find the right person, I would have value or worth. Pride and insecurity are revealers that we're looking to something other than Christ for our Savior. And pride and insecurity are the same thing. They're 2 sides of the same coin. So when we sit there and say someone's insecure, I just need to encourage them. Well, there's a way to encourage someone that's encouraged them in the Lord, and just like another way to just puff them up and like, oh, you can do it. Well, be careful, because insecurity can be pride. The difference is life is a game, and if you're prideful, you think you're winning the game, so you look down on everyone else. Insecurity is that you're losing the game and you're looking up at everyone else. Both of them are looking through the lens of ourselves. It's pride, insecurity. The gospel is oftentimes in churches, and I think we all come from different streams and different backgrounds. And so I know in the stream that I kind of grew up with, and I had a lot of different experiences, but I can speak to growing up in various charismatic churches that many times people treated the gospel as like the baby food. It's the beginning, and then everything else is like the gospel is for the new people. That's not true. The only way that you keep growing is the gospel. Gospel is the entry into salvation, but it's also the only way we really grow. That the gospel, as we reflect and allow the gospel to impact every area of our life, that convicts us, grows us, and empowers us in our finances, in our sex lives, in our marriage, in our education, in our minds, in the junk that we all deal with. So when he talks about the Spirit, Paul is directly connecting that the Spirit works through the gospel. The work of the Holy Spirit never works apart from the gospel. You know, the fruits of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit, all of that is through the gospel. When we get into a situation where we're like, oh, I'm just going to try harder. If we screw up, if we didn't get what we want, we're like, I'm just going to try harder the next time. Or some people just give up. Here's the issue, and you guys have heard us talk about this before, and we have other training videos on this issue. most of the time when people present a problem, it's not the real problem. Either they don't have the self-awareness to realize that the problem that they're stating is not the real problem, or they're not telling the truth. So if someone gets upset with somebody on your teams and they come say that, oh, I can't work with them, XYZ, almost never is the problem they stated the real problem. If someone states their issue with their parent, it's almost never the real issue. Do you know, there's been a lot of research done on family dynamics, and often somebody has an issue with one of their parents. Well, through a lot of therapy and stuff, what's interesting is they come to find out that oftentimes the parent that they're the most upset with is not the one they've always thought themselves to be upset with. For example, if let's just say you take a father who was abusive, verbally or physically, and of course there's this anger, resentment, unforgiveness towards that person. It's kind of a built-up thing. It's like often people say, well, of course you have an issue with your dad or your mom because they're the ones that abused you. Well, come to find out, often when they actually work through it, they actually have more anger and resentment towards the other parent because they think things like, why didn't you stop them? But that was the parent that they felt like they could trust, and yet at the same time, there was this something that I can't be upset with them. So what's interesting is, again, often the problem that we think is the issue is not the real issue. That's why we dig deeper. That's why in our lead track, we talk about looking for red flags. We talk about how to dig deeper, because again, if someone comes to you and says that they're ticked off and they're leaving the church because they're upset with XYZ somebody, understand that's not the real issue, normally. If someone comes on your team and they say, well, I'm just burnt out, I can't serve anymore, that's almost never the real issue. See, often our anger or unforgiveness, if you get to the root of it, it is a revealer that there's actually a deeper sin in us. So I want to read you this tweet from Timothy Keller. He says, you can only stay bitter towards someone if you feel superior. If you feel that you would never do anything like they did. Those who won't forgive show that they have not accepted the fact of their own sinfulness. So when someone has an offense against someone, it's not that they said something that ticks you off. It's a revealer of something in you. It's a revealer of the sin in you. Almost any of our responses towards other people is a reflection of something in us. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the stuff they did or said is okay. It doesn't mean that, everything they did was fine and some of the stuff is wrong. However, how we respond to those things does reflect something in us. If we sit there and we do not let the gospel invade every area of our life, we will blame everybody for everything in our life all the time and never, ever grow up. We'll always, if it's financial, we'll always blame on not having enough money. We'll always blame it on that one person who screwed us over on the job. Timothy Keller says that we grow by continually rooting out these lies, these issues, these systems that we use to control our lives. If we have an offense, it reveals something in our lives. There are several big systems that we use for self-saviors. Number one is control. Another one is approval. Another one is comfort. Let's just say that you're really angry at someone. You're just bitter. The prayer that we should pray is not, Lord, please take away my anger. Because as Timothy Keller says, the only way that we can hold a grudge against someone is if we believe we're superior to them. If we believe that we are better than them is the only way that we can hold a grudge against them. What we really need to pray is, Lord, please forgive me of my own self-righteousness, because I'm looking to something else to save me other than you. So if someone gets upset because someone else got a job or they got raised up and they didn't, and they're so ticked off about it, that jealousy, that root, if you can't be happy that somebody else was successful and someone else got it, and we can all empathize. If there's a position that we wanted and we didn't get it, like, we can empathize with the disappointment. But to lash out because they got it and we didn't is a revealer that we're looking to something else as our Savior more than Christ. Because if we really trust that God was directing our lives, then we could be thrilled that someone else got the job. Because we could trust God that he would open up the door that he wants us to open up, that he is opening and closing the doors that he is wanting to open and close. See, what ends up happening is we have these systems of self-saviors. Again, some of them are control. I'm going to save myself by being able to control my life. Or I'm going to be able to save my life by comfort, making it as enjoyable as possible. Or the way I control and save myself and feel good is approval of others. What ends up happening, if that's our Savior, then every time somebody doesn't give us what we want or gets in the way of it, we respond. Because now we've been blocked by our own Savior. So when someone sits there and says that they couldn't get connected, even though they went to groups and other people got connected, there's a jealousy that they don't have the connection other people have. And people interactions, sometimes some people connect more easily than others. It just happens. But what's happening in that person is that they're not getting the approval that they want, and they're jealous of the approval that other people are getting. And likely, if you trace that back, that approval issue is a reoccurring theme in their life. And the reason we have to be careful is because for those of you, especially that are more empathetic, you sit there and they're broken. You can empathize with their desire to be connected. But if you don't realize that thing is connected to a deeper sin, then you're going to enable that sin. You're going to be upset because someone didn't, connect with them, ignoring the fact that they didn't even go to the small group 4 out of the 5 weeks that was going. They're just upset because the first week that no one talked to them. Now, we don't want that. As a church, obviously, we want guests to be welcome. We want people to feel plugged in. But also, we're helping people grow spiritually. The gospel saves. The gospel helps us grow. So if you're working with someone and they're ticked off because they have an offense with someone else and they won't forgive them, or they're using that as a reason to go somewhere else, you have to help them grow, because the gospel would help them freed from their past junk and also help them free someone else from their mistake or offense. See, someone who's always going around and around with sin and offenses, the gospel, they're stepping on the gospel. There's a deeper pride. Either, we at some time back, we had a young man who wanted to be in a position of leadership. Well, over a period of time, that might have happened, but there were some immaturities. So it took a little bit longer. They were upset. They went somewhere else. Guess what? They end up going somewhere else. Over and over and over again. And it was everybody else's fault. Why? Because his Savior was achievement, was a position. And when he didn't get what he wanted, it was everyone else's fault. It's unfair because the Savior wasn't Christ. I'm not saying he doesn't have saving faith, but he wasn't living out that truth in his life. So when we get really angry or disappointed or offended, sometimes even hurt, the question we should ask ourselves is, what is it that I think I need so much? What is it that I really believe I need so much? Because that might reveal that we're looking to something else to save us other than Christ. So I'm going to pause right there, ask you guys a question. If you were going to be honest, and maybe it's not one of these three, comfort, control, approval, but I'm going to ask you guys in the room, and I'm going to ask if there's someone moderating this in a room, or maybe you're just online watching this. Ask yourself this question: which of these is more likely to be the one that you struggle with? And maybe it's not one of these. What is a self-savior that you might struggle with, that you recognize because you react to it? So it's interesting that we all can have different responses. And I wonder, depending on which one of these things is threatened or blocked, if we might respond differently, or do we respond the same to all of these? Because some people respond by leaving. So they leave a relationship, they leave a place because they never want to deal with it. And you've heard us say this before. It's just like a marriage. Someone just keeps leaving a marriage. They're gonna, if they don't resolve it, they're gonna go around that same mountain over and over and over again. Someone leaves a friendship, they leave a job, they leave a church, and they never deal with it the right way. and they don't leave for the right reasons, it's like they'll go around that same mountain forever until they deal with it. It's amazing how often we teach on this and how often we've seen that. Sometimes people will come to our church and be like, oh, I can't believe the last church I went to was this and that. And they think like, it's like, makes me feel good, because then they say, but I love this church. And I'm like, all right, red flag, because if you're saying all this when we just met, saying this about them, and you were there for 10 years or 5 years or 3 years or whatever, I'm afraid you're going to do that here too. And you'll often see those patterns. And it often is not just in one spot. Sometimes it's specific to an area, but often it's in various areas of their life. Some people leave. Some people lash out with anger. Some people pout. Some people doubt. And they just beat themselves up. Some are passive aggressive. They don't want to come off too aggressive, so they more passively aggressive. Some people are just aggressive and angry. Well, I'm sure we all do all of these to some degree, but again, which self-savior or false idol are you more likely to respond to, and what is more likely to be your response? This is an important leadership development, because you guys are going to be, people are going to come to you all the time. You always have to be processing. You always have to be processing. What is the problem beneath the problem? So we've done this actually in our leadership, our lead track, where we do the 5 whys. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why is that? So for example, so let's say someone comes to you and says that you're leading a small group, and they want to leave the small group because someone just offended them. They said something that was completely offensive. All right? So you start off with what is the problem? All right? They said something that was completely inappropriate. All right. Why did that impact you? Well, because that really hurt my feelings. Why? Well, when you dig a little bit deeper, it's actually because I struggle with insecurity, and what they said made me remember something when I was younger that was said. Well, why? Because I never really dealt with that. Why? Because I'm looking to people for my affirmation, because I look to my dad for affirmation. He didn't give it to me. Right? If you dig deeper, you start to get to the root of the issues more and more and more. Almost never, when people bring up a problem and the reason they give the problem, almost never is it the real issue. Almost never is it the root of the issue. It's usually the symptom, and you have to dig deeper for it.
When you're kind of leading somebody, and like you said, they come to you and it's not what they say is the problem, is not the problem. And you're going through the 5 whys. Do you have any advice for someone that you're dealing with somebody who's just not self-aware?
I mean, sometimes, honestly, you have to pick your spots. And this is why you have to be cautious. If there's someone that's not self-aware, you got to really think through what positions you put them in. Because if they can't deal with their own stuff, I mean, we all have blind spots, right? If someone says they don't have a blind spot, they have a huge blind spot. So that's one of the things that we look for is that, like, one of the things I appreciated today is something got missed in the creative team, and Sierra's like, oh, that was my bad. Just owning it, right? Just being able to own it. It's so hard for people to own their stuff. It has to be someone else's fault. And that doesn't mean that people don't influence us. It doesn't mean that sometimes people, sometimes people are jerks. Hurt people, right? So I think that's where you need some of the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. It depends on your relationship. Depends on the situation. Like if it's an immediate situation and you can't ignore it and you have to deal with it then, you got to deal with it then. Is it something that is best developed in a deeper relationship, like getting to know that person so they know that you care about them, so that you have the street cred to go in there and address that issue? And then wondering, am I the right person? And I don't mean that by like abdicating it and handing it off. So if you didn't hear that question, the question is, what if you're dealing with somebody, how do you help them see this if they're not self-aware? And then there are just some things that you're just like, I was in a meeting recently with someone who I debated if I should say something or not. because I'm like, it's obviously that they're not self-aware. It's obviously that they're deceived. And I debated, I'm like, do I say something or not? I don't think they're going to hear it. I've been in this situation multiple times with people. And sometimes I don't. And sometimes I do. And if I do, I communicate, listen, I'm going to say something and you may not like it, but I'm only saying it because I really do care about you and I want the best for you. This is what I'm seeing. And my fear is if you don't get a hold of this situation, it's going to run your life for the rest of your life. See, because God loves you so much, he's going to chase you down. And it's better for you to deal with it now than later. When you have that kind of conversation, two things will usually happen. Number one, they'll be thankful and they'll actually be like, well, how do I improve? Number two, you never see them again. Or the other version of that is they start slandering you on Facebook. If it's someone that's reasonably mature, you can have an honest conversation. That's how real friendships develop. That we all need that. If they're really mature, then you can have that conversation. It's a situational things. So I'm going to pray for you, and I hope this equipping moment helped you a little bit with something. If you have any questions, make a comment down below, reach out to us, send an email, whatever. I don't know what you're going to put on there, but Lord, in Jesus' name, I just pray, God, that you'd help us to be, one, more self-aware, and help us to look to your gospel and understand that every other false gospel is dead. It does not lead to life. I pray, God, that you'd help us to continually to grow. And you know each of our own weaknesses. And I pray, God, that you'd help us to find freedom, continue to grow in maturity, and also help us to lead other people. Give us wisdom and discernment, the mind of Christ, when there's people come to us, so that when someone states a problem, that we can help better see the problem beneath the problem, so we can actually lead them in the right direction. Give us wisdom and counsel when we have to speak to someone. And I pray, God, that your Holy Spirit would go out with our words, because we can't change people, but you can. Lord, help us, bless our minds and our hearts, bring healing to our wounds, and help us to understand the power of your gospel in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Now, invariably, when you're working with someone, some of the conflict's going to come because they're offended. They could be offended because something that was preached about, offended because somebody said something, didn't say something. It's really important as a coach that you do not take on the offenses of your leaders. Your job is not to protect them. Your job is to help grow them. All right? So we actually did a message on this in our series, It's Complicated, where we deal with a biblical approach to offense. And so you might want to go and pull up that. In fact, there's a link here. We're going to add that on so you can follow that up and make sure you get that of how you deal with folks. Because here's an important thing. When someone's offended, their level of offense reflects more on them than the other people. That's almost always the case. So again, even if there's legitimacy to it, how someone responds to an offense is usually a revealer of maturity. But highlighting here, Matthew tells us that we are to try to reconcile. So if the persons haven't tried to reconcile, no matter how nice they are to you, then they're not acting out biblically. Another issue is in Titus, when someone's purposely causing problems, there's another process of you warn them, and then if they keep doing it, then you have to do something else with them. But again, go watch that message, get equipped in that, and so you can better handle, because somebody in your team is going to get offended. And some people in your leadership will offend somebody else. It's just going to happen. So make sure that you get equipped on that. And the last tool we want to talk to you about here when it comes to problem solving is refer you back to our red flag worksheet. Because again, almost always the issue that people say are the problems are not the real problems. So you've got to actually process and figure out to help them get to the real issue. So you might want to go back to the lead track equipping on this issue to get more equipped on this. We also have a chart to help you process and also figure out yourself where where the real issue might be. And the first thing is something like this, is a red flag is usually the symptom, not the problem, right? So if somebody's offended, that's usually not that's a symptom, it's not the problem. It could be a symptom of immaturity. It could be a symptom of a legitimate issue, but immaturity in how they handle it. So you gotta make sure that you look beyond just the symptom. For example, if the red flag is that they're flighty and they will not commit, it may not be that they're too busy. It may be that they don't know how to plant. It may not have anything to do with what they're saying. It may literally be slothfulness, because slothfulness does not like to plant or commit to anything. So the biblical solution to that is to plant. And some of the things that you can do is share the vision. Someone that's in this stage, it may be hard to change that, but you can start to invest in them perhaps to grow in this particular area. If someone's easily offended, that's a symptom. It may be that the real problem is that they're self-righteous or they're unforgiving. So what's the biblical perspective is that you try to give the benefit of the doubt. You reconcile. You're not easily offended. And also, one of the ways that you deal with this, sometimes you point out a different perspective, or you might actually reveal what the Bible says of how to deal with these sort of things. So again, that's just a tool to be able to help you navigate some of these red flags. I know there's been a lot of information, and you're not going to be experts on this right away. That's why we're giving this to you. And again, this is also why later on you may need to break up pieces of this so that you can better understand it and your teams can better understand these pieces. Now we're going to break out into some administrative tools that will help you do your job better.
Another type of tool in the coach's tool belt are administrative tools. And the goal of this is to carry some of that administrative weight for you. So you're spending most of your time on the most important things, which is actually coaching and developing your leaders. And some of these tools help to carry the weight, and so that some of the time you're kind of just staying accountable and keeping track of priorities. So the first administrative tool I want to talk about is church teams. Now, if you're in Coach Track, you've already used church teams on the leader level. At the leader level of church teams, you basically can see all of the people and their profiles within the groups or teams that you're the leader of. But at the coach level, things change a little bit. But before I get to the how-to, I want to take some time to set up the why. So why does it matter that we use church teams to keep track of things as a coach? Well, the first reason is to care for our teams better. It makes sure that care is consistent. One of the cool things about church teams is every person has a profile where you can actually have confidential notes where if someone's struggling with something, or they need help with something, they need a resource, or they need prayer, or they need counseling, or they need a small group, there's actually a place that you can go in and keep track of that to make sure that care is consistent across the board. I think there have been a lot of times that people, because this part administratively wasn't strong, people assumed that their leader or their coach didn't care. That's just not the case. It's just that we weren't keeping track, so things got a little bit out of order, out of priority. So church teams actually helps us to better care for people because we know what's going on with them. That plays into the second one. Communication helps us to know actually what's going on with people. So you can actually, in a member's profile, you can see not only their prayer requests, you can see any small groups they've previously been in, any ones that they're in now. You can see what dream teams they're on. You can see what interests that they have. You can see what spiritual gifts or personality type they may have. It kind of is just, it helps to improve communication even across teams, but also within teams with your leaders. And finally, accountability. Having church teams helps you stay on track because there's actually a built-in function just for coaches that helps remind you to check in with your leaders, which I'm really excited to share with you. So when you are a coach, you have a different login than when you're a leader. So that's something that will need to be set up where you have a special coach login. You actually kind of go, there are different levels of clearance, if you will. So the coach level, and that is going to open up a few things for you. So number one, that coach login actually gives you reminders weekly to check in with your leaders. So you know that we want to do a monthly coaching with our leaders. So every week, now usually coaches are responsible for 5 people. So every week you're going to get an email that says, hey, have you checked on these people on your team, these leaders that you're responsible for this month? So this is an actual example of an email that I got a week and a half ago. So it shows groups for Sharon Schmidt, you see that? And then under that it says Coach Track. Let's say you were the coach for 5 small groups. All of those small groups would appear there. Let's say you were the coach for all the preschool classes, for example. All of those classes, you know how when leaders take attendance, all of those attendance groups, they show up right there. So when I, as the coach, am like, okay, so I have scheduled this week to follow up with my Coach Track leader, I can click that group and I can actually be taken to a page to share notes from my coaching session with them. What's really cool about this is it provides a level of accountability that obviously you have your own calendar and you're making your own schedule, but when you actually each month are prompted to put in some notes about your leaders, for me at least, it helps me to actually do that, right? I don't keep pushing it off. So on the next slide, I want you to see what it looks like when you click on the group. So it takes you to this page where you can put in the date and just information on how your coaching session went. And like I said before, this is going to help us care better for our leaders, because let's say that person moves to another team. That new coach, whoever is their new coach, will be able to see that. I'd also asked, what if when I get that email, I'm not ready to put notes in just yet? And that's fine. You don't have to do it right then, but you wanna still save that email. You can also just log in. So this is sort of a dashboard for you as the coach, where you can see all of the groups that you're coaching, and again, whether that be dream team groups or small groups, you can see all the groups that you're coaching. You can also see any notes that you have added, so any coaching sessions you've had with them before are going to go under most recent note. And if you have an impromptu coaching session, you want to log something there, you can go to add and add those notes in there. If you go to recent meetings and view all meetings, you can see the attendance record, whether it's for their dream team that they are the leader over, or whether it's for the small group that they lead. You can see all of their recent meetings. So I feel that this is going to help us get better at holding ourselves accountable to meeting with our folks once a month. But you're not limited to just once a month. As I said, you can add an impromptu note at any time by clicking add. Additionally, as a coach, you will get CC'd. Church teams will automatically copy you on all the attendance reports of the groups that you coach. So let's say that I am the worship coach. I'm going to get CC'd on all of the team reports for the weekly Dream Team attendance reports for vocals and band. Same thing if I'm a small group coach. I'm going to get a week, every time they submit a report of who attended small group that week, and they click the green button, send, it comes to me. So, and if they have not filled out that report, and church teams will prompt them 4 times, and if they have not filled it out after 4 times, church team sends me an email that says, hey, please follow up with, and it gives me the name of the group. They've not completed their attendance report for this week. So it also kind of provides that level of accountability for them, that it is important to fill out your attendance report, obviously, because we need to keep track of attendance, but there's actually somebody who knows if they don't. And if there's an issue, like let's say I had no idea that, they just had someone in their family pass away, and that's why they haven't been looking at their email for the last 3 days, and I check in and they say, I'm sorry, this is what's going on in my life. It gives me as the coach the opportunity to be there and to pray and to care for them, because I might not otherwise know, because I may not be the first person they text when they lose a loved one. So that's another way that church teams and these reports and emails kind of help us stay on track. So one note here is that upon completion of the coach track, your facilitator will work with the serve director to ensure that you get the appropriate coach level access to church teams. So that's something that will be worked out as you complete the coach track. So the second administrative tool in our coach tool belt is a system to prioritize the most important things. As a coach, the goal is not for you to do everything. We discussed that in delegation. As a coach, the most important things are the big rocks and things like that that help keep our priorities at the forefront. So this next video is essentially an equipping on how to do that.
So I'm going to do a quick equipping on prioritizing. And this may be relevant to any of us here, whether you're on staff, whether you are a leader level or a coach level or director level or higher. This may have actually even help you in your regular day-to-day life as well. But one of the things that you have to process when you decide what you're doing, you have to start from big picture to task. If you only focus on the task, if you only focus on the immediate future, you'll probably never accomplish the most important things. There are some unique situations in crisis management and things of that nature, but the problem is some people, the way that they operate, they're always in crisis management and they never get to the main things. So, for example, one of the things that we teach each other, our team, to do is what we call big rocks. And the analogy goes like this. Most people, when it comes to time, when it comes to decisions, they say, I don't have enough time. And most of that's not true. It's that we don't spend the right amount of time in the right things, because we all have the same amount of time, and yet some people just seem to be far more productive than others. So the analogy goes like this, is that you have a container, and this container represents our time. You start with the big rocks, and then you start with the medium-sized rocks, and then you start with the small rocks, then the pebbles, then the sand, then the water, and therefore you maximize your container. But what most people do is they start with the water, they start with the sand, they start with the pebbles, and then all of a sudden they don't realize that they're out of time. This is the reason why people say they don't have time to do their devotions. It's the reason why they don't have time to connect with people. It's the reason why they don't have time to do some of the most important things, because we're not disciplined enough to do the right things. And some decisions will impact other decisions. For example, I have noticed that whenever I eat healthier and I make healthier decisions, I have more energy, I'm more productive. Whenever that goes to the sideways, it's important we realize that we don't have the energy that we should have. We're not as productive as we should have. So even decisions that we don't see connect to each other. And so when we sit there and go, oh, I don't have enough time, most of the time it's not that we don't have enough time. Most of the time it's that we've not done a good enough job of prioritizing our time. So one of the things that we like to do on our team, and this is something that's always something that we're improving on, is we look at what the big rocks are for that semester. What are the 3 or 4 main things? What are we trying to accomplish in that semester? And you start with that big rock. And it's something that needs to be smart. So that's, some of you guys probably have heard this before, but it's specific. It's not a concept. It's not like I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to read books. It's not a concept. It's specific. It's measurable. I'm going to lose this amount of weight. I'm going to read. So, for example, I always have a goal to read at least 52 books a year. I used to have a goal that I just want to read. Well, that never did anything. So that means I want to read at least 1 book every week. And so that's specific. It's measurable. Then is it attainable? Trying to be realistic about whether or not this is something that can actually be done. Now, the danger of this is that either people will overshoot what they can do, or they'll undershoot, depending on how you're wired. If you like to play it safe, you're always undershoot, because it's not comfortable. People who like to play it safe, they like to walk at a deliberate pace. Well, sometimes in some seasons, you can't walk at that pace. At the same time, some goals can be so unattainable that you'll never reach it, so you might want to look at a different goal. So you have to know what your default is to overshoot or undershoot, because either one will hurt your organization. If you're always like a plotter and you're going at your pace, that may be comfortable for you, but it may actually hurt the organization. Sometimes you have to learn to work at a faster pace. And then other times, it's like, okay, for example, I think we really wanted to do a capital campaign one year in the spring and realize it's probably not going to be realistic for the spring, but it may be more realistic for the fall. And so, because that gives us enough time to get things ready and answer a lot of other, answer a lot of questions that we have to do to get ready for that. So you have to go, so it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, meaning, is this big rock relevant to what you're called to do? Your job, your role? Is it relevant? Or is this just something that's an outlier to something else? Because a lot of times, a lot of people's goals have nothing to do with what their job is, or what their role is, or what the vision of the church is, or if you're applying this outside of the church, outside of maybe what your job is, or career is, or whatever it might be. And then the T is time specific. If you don't have something time specific, it will never happen. It'll always be a concept out there somewhere. It never happens. So you have these big rocks that are specific in themselves. Then you have initiatives. These are ways. These are not tasks. These are not simple tasks. These are initiatives that help accomplish the big rock. So if you're going to lose weight, your initiatives would be like your different workout plans, would be your eating plan. Maybe your plan on how to avoid situations that that you'd be more tempted to. Like, for example, one of my initiatives was to try to get one of my kids to start working out with me, so I'd be more faithful in working out in the mornings. And so far, it's been successful because my daughter's been working out with me. And the one day I didn't wake her up, she asked me, she's like, "Daddy, why didn't you wake me up?" So I'm like, okay, she's expecting it. So that was one of my initiatives to try to train her up, actually end up helping me. For example, if one of your big rocks is to see 50 people come to the Lord, initiatives could be, if you're in your outreach department, could be different outreaches or different mission trips or different partnerships with other nonprofits that help you accomplish that overall goal. And then you have basically tasks. These are things that you do. Go back to the workout, losing weight. Task would be meal prep. Task would be having a consistent ordering of meals. Task could be getting the right equipment. See, these are tasks. The problem is most people live in the task. If you live in the task, you never even, it's not that you don't even reach the big rocks, you often don't even reach the initiative. So, in your area of leadership, if you're a coach or a leader, what are your big rocks? And what are your main focus and how does that play out? Now, you break that down on a monthly level and a weekly level. So for example, you have your big rocks for the month, you have these initiatives. So like, let's just say we did outreaches. Our big initiative for October was, say, trunk or treat or a fall festival of some sort or something along those lines. And then you schedule leading up to that weekly. Here are my top 3 things to accomplish. So this is what you do. You take your list of things that have to get done, and you process how many of those things that you need to do, because this goes in, we have another video on delegation. And so if you want that video, we're gonna link it down below for delegation that can tell you how, what things can you delay, what things to delegate, how do you understand that. But let's just say you've already done that, and if you haven't, you can pause this, go back to the delegation video, watch that. But now you have a list of things that you know you have to do. Well, what you do is you process that on a monthly level. What are my top priorities? You process that every week. What are the top 3 things? So you look at the list. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. What are the most important things? And then you organize the rest of them in order. The problem that many people have is they see this massive list, and then they just start chopping it down without prioritizing them and not realizing, for example, say if I'm a leader and I realize that there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done and I'm not getting it all done. And yet there's constantly this repeated task that has to get done. If I put more attention on that, I will never answer the big picture. However, if I sit there and go, there's this whole list of things, and the highest priority really is to multiply 4 people. Guess what happens? I may have to pause this one task, but if I can get those 4 people, all of a sudden, those tasks get done faster and more consistently. It's almost like a definition of insanity. If you do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results, it's insanity. So you have to process the most important things. And you do that each week and each day. So here's something that I do is I typically meet with myself. So I will often come to the office an hour and a half, somewhere between an hour and 2 hours before the office opens up. Now, not everyone has to do it that way, but I take the time to do my devotions. I take the time to process my priorities. What are the biggest things? Who do I need to talk to? What things do I need? And I organize them. What is the top priorities? What's the bottom priorities? I also do that for the week. I look at what I want to accomplish for the week, and at the end of the week, I evaluate. And I have this list. I move all the things that didn't get done, that still need to get done, I move them on so they don't get lost. So at the front of the week, I process my top 3 big rocks. At the end of the week, I also process my progress. I do the same thing every day. In the morning, I process my big rocks for the day. And each morning, I look back, even like what I did this morning, I look back. It's a Tuesday. I look back at what didn't get accomplished on Monday. I move that over. Sometimes I'll move it today. Sometimes I'll move it to another day. Sometimes I realize I don't need that anymore because I have new information. I can delete that, just get rid of it. On Sunday, I reviewed what I did last week. And I add what are the tops on my personal life and my professional life. These are different ways that I help make sure the main things are getting done. So if you're a coach, you want to help your leaders make sure that the main things are getting done and the tasks are not the main things. What I mean by that is this. If you're in kids ministry and printing is always a problem, and it's always like, we got to get it printed, we always got to get it printed, we got to get it printed. That's really not the issue. The issue is maybe that you don't have somebody that's really responsible for that, or maybe the issue is that the printer's too far away, or maybe whatever it is. So you have to process the big picture stuff first because that makes the little things easier. If you do the tasks first, and that's a higher priority, you will always be walking uphill, always. You will never be as productive. You'll never be as, your area of leadership will never be as healthy as it needs to be. You might be naturally wired to do tasks first. You might be naturally wired to look at big picture first. However you're wired, find someone who's different than you and try to learn from each other to improve in that area. So it's really important, this principle of highlighting what are the most important things on a semester basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly and daily basis. But if you don't set time aside to meet with yourself, to review, most likely you won't get any of this done. Most likely you're going to always be, they call like a victim of the tyranny of the urgent, or something like that. So that's just a very simple way. Is 3 big rocks. 3 big rocks. List it out. What are the most important things? If you're a leader, what are the most important things for your team? Maybe if you're on the greeting team, maybe it's how to greet effectively, or maybe it's to help teach your team things not to say. All right, what are your top 3 things, and keep reminding people and keep that in front of them. If you're a coach, what are the 3 biggest things that you're trying to accomplish through your leaders that you want them to know? You got to keep that in front of them. If you're a leader, a director, you got to keep them in front of them the organizational main goals and also individually. So you have to help translate that and zero in. One person asked me this question. You know what happens when there's something on your list of things to do, but you're basically, it's dependent on something else. Like you can't make it happen because you're waiting for the printer to send it, or you're waiting for a reply from a contractor or something of that nature. What I do is it's on my list. So what happens is when I'm done, I have my list and I have my top 3, and then I have all my other tasks. If I've delegated it, I put the person's initials. So it's like, NS or AC or whatever it might be. And so if it's delegated, I know it's that person. I know to circle back to that person. If it's done, I check it off. If I'm waiting on it, I put a line through it, that I'm waiting on something, and I'll put a note of what I'm waiting on. Or if I didn't get to it, or if I'm waiting on it in a sense that it's past that day, I'll put an arrow, which means defer. So that means I'm going to review it again that next day. Or if I defer it, I'll put a date on it. So for example, if it's something I know I can get to the next day, it'll be the next day. If I know that I'm waiting from a contractor, they say they're going to reply to me next Monday, I will actually put that in that date on that next Monday, either on my calendar or I have like a journal book that I have dates on. So I'll put it back. So when I go to that date, as soon as I turn that page, it's already there that I'm waiting for a response from this person. If it's from an email, now they have one of that tools that you can defer or you can snooze it and it will pop up on that day. We use Monday, and sometimes you can have reminders that pop up. So the thing is that it gets pushed back. You have a time when you're reviewing it. So at the end of the week, I have a whole list in my book of what didn't get done. And then I can reprioritize again. This didn't get done, that's number one priority. Or this didn't get done and I realize it's not that important, so I'm gonna delete it for now. But there needs to be a place that you're gonna see repeatedly of things that you're waiting on, or else it just gets lost. I use my book, my journal, my to-do journal. Sometimes I'll use my calendar, especially if it's more than a week past. I'll put on my calendar because it will show up. Or if it's in my emails, I'll do a snooze to pop up to review. For example, the way I would use that is I often have lots of content. I will sometimes email myself. I find it, I just share it to myself, and maybe I didn't get to share or didn't get to equip people on it. I will actually snooze it for a month later to pop back up for me to review. So those are just different ways to kind of review. Everything usually gets into my little journal. I don't think I have it with me, but you probably, if I go to meetings, you'll probably see that I have it most meetings I go to. So one question that was brought up was, what happens if you're easily distracted? Or what happens if you're just in a season where there's a lot of distracting things? I think there's a few different ways to handle that. Number one is, I think, having a way that this is constantly in front of you. So I notice that in the days that I don't look at my book or I don't look at my Monday board, Monday is just a software system we use that we can track tasks and communicate and things of that nature. If I'm not looking at those things, I'm more likely to get distracted. So I think finding ways to keep that in front of you is one way to handle if you're easily distracted. The other way is accountability. One of the things that's often missing when people aren't accomplishing their goals is a level of accountability. That means you probably need somebody checking in. If you're a coach, you need to be checking in with your leaders, because most of your leaders probably want to do well. Well, one of the ways you help them do well is keeping them accountable. Like, you said you were going to do this. Did this get done? So you have to have some level, some system to make sure that got done. In small groups, or if you're a dream team, sometimes church teams is that way. So if you put in notes for your church teams, it will often pop up if you did it or not. So if you're a director and your coaches aren't actually helping your leaders, your directors can see if they're putting in notes in church teams or not, and realize if they're accomplishing their job or not. In Monday, for our staff, you can see progress. Is it happening or is it not happening? So having accountability is one way that you can have people speak into it and make sure. I think that's been one of our issues in the early stages of our church, is that we didn't have appropriate accountability systems because we didn't have some of the secondary leadership in place that would make that happen, which was obvious in kind of our production and how things got done. But also finding ways, how do you keep that in front of you? Is it a book? Is it a Post-it note? Like reminders, maybe your phone, for those of you that are easily distracted, reminders to check in with that list to make sure that the main things are getting done. There are going to be seasons where this is harder than others, because some things, if you're talking about an organizational level, or maybe there's a lot of transition in your life, maybe a new job, or your kids are starting a new grade or something along those lines, things can change. For example, for us, we pretty much had a plan of what we thought the year was going to look like, and then all of a sudden an opportunity to merge came, which changed everything, because it wasn't just merge, it was also building projects and trying to figure out where services were going to go and renovations. There was a lot of different things that we had to figure out, and so that there was a lot of moving parts there. I think this is why you have to keep coming back to what is the most important thing. What is the most important thing? What is the highest priority? And I think this is the real issue if you're working on a team. Most of the time when that's a conflict is when you have different priorities. And if you don't have the same priorities, it's always going to be a problem. So I think that that's one of the biggest issues, is that most of the time when there's a changing of priorities, is that you have to make sure that if you're the leader, that your staff or your team has the same priorities of you. And if not, that needs to change. Because if their priorities aren't the same as yours, then a change has to happen. At the same time, sometimes you get into a situation like maybe you're developing. The hardest times is when you're establishing new systems or new rhythms. When you're starting something new, especially organizationally, and the larger your organization is, the harder this is and the longer that wet concrete season is. That's why people who are more plotters and like consistency, that's why they don't like the season. They like things to be like settled and move forward. That's never gonna happen in a completely advancing culture. Certain things will get stabilized, but if you're continually growing, there's always gonna be some wet cement somewhere. It's just that there may be seasons, like for example, there's one season where we came in a new building, we grew without a staff. It was like me, and that was the only staff person. Then we got hit with COVID and then merging, and then all of a sudden we started to have staff, and it was the most fluid season of our existence, except for probably pre-launch time of the church. So I think the biggest thing is you have to always go back to what is the most important thing, and you have to make sure that your priorities are the same as your leader's priorities, or if you're the leader, that your people's priorities are the same as yours.
Okay, so now that we've covered all of the coaching tools in our coach tool belt, we're going to activate some of these with some homework.